The stethoscope felt cold against Krystyna Krahelska's neck as she bent over the wounded fighter in the basement clinic. Above them, Warsaw's cobblestones echoed with the measured bootsteps of German patrols. But down here in the hidden world beneath St. Martin's Church, time moved differently. August 1st, 1944. The air tasted of antiseptic and secrets. "Nurse," whispered Tomek, barely 19 with a bullet wound that had missed his lung by millimeters. "Is it true? Are the Soviets really at Praga?" Krystyna pressed a clean bandage against his shoulder, her poet's hand surprisingly steady. Through the brick walls, she could hear the distant rumble that had been growing stronger each day artillery fire from the eastern suburbs. The Red Army was indeed across the Vistula River, so close they could taste freedom on the summer wind. "Rest now," she murmured. But her brown eyes betrayed the electricity coursing through every resistant cell in the city. For weeks, coded messages had passed through the underground network. Burza Storm was coming. Operation Tempest would reclaim Warsaw from German hands before Stalin's forces arrived. The basement clinic had been her secret world for 8 months now. By day, she worked at the municipal hospital, tending to German officers and Polish collaborators with the same professional care. By night, she descended into this maze of tunnels and hidden rooms where Armia Krajowa fighters nursed their wounds and planned impossible victories. Her leather poetry notebook lay open beside the medical supplies, verses scribbled between surgeries, songs that carried hope through the darkest hours. The same hands that wrote about freedom now sutured the wounds of those who fought for it. But tonight felt different. Electric. Dangerous. The wooden door creaked open and Stefan emerged from the shadows, his face grim. "Krystyna, we have a problem." She looked up from bandaging Tomek's wound. Stefan was one of the reliable ones, a literature teacher by day, saboteur by night. His worried expression made her stomach tighten. "There's someone upstairs. German uniform, but..." Stefan paused. "He's asking for sanctuary." In the candlelit basement, everyone fell silent. A German soldier requesting sanctuary from Polish resistance fighters? It defied every rule of occupied Warsaw. "Wounded?" Krystyna asked, already reaching for her medical bag. "Badly. Bullet in the abdomen, probably infected, but Krystyna..." Stefan grabbed her wrist gently. "He says he has information about tomorrow." Tomorrow. August 1st was supposed to be the beginning 5 p.m. when church bells across Warsaw would signal the start of the uprising. But how could a German deserter know? Krystyna felt her pulse quicken. Above them, the city continued its careful dance of occupation Polish civilians hurrying past German checkpoints, black market vendors whispering prices for bread and ammunition, resistance couriers carrying messages through sewer systems that had become highways of hope. She tucked her notebook into her apron pocket, its weight familiar against her hip. Inside those pages were not just poems, but coded lists of medical supplies, safe houses, and the lyrics to songs that would soon echo through burning streets. Bring him down, she decided. If he dies, we learn nothing. If he lives... Stefan nodded and disappeared up the narrow stairs. Moments later, 2 fighters carried down a pale German soldier, his Wehrmacht uniform soaked with blood and filth. He couldn't have been older than 20, with fair hair matted against his skull and eyes that had seen too much. As Krystyna began examining his wound, the soldier grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Schwester," he whispered in accented Polish. "They know. About tomorrow. About all of it." The basement fell deadly silent. Outside, a church bell chimed midnight, marking August 1st. In 17 hours, Warsaw was supposed to rise, but Krystyna realized they weren't the only ones counting down the minutes. The stethoscope slipped from her fingers as footsteps thundered overhead, too many footsteps moving too fast. Someone had been watching the church. The footsteps above weren't random patrol boots. They moved with purpose, surrounding the church. Krystyna's hands never stopped working on the German deserter's wound, even as her mind raced. 17 hours until the uprising, and their safest medical station was about to be compromised. "Stefan," she whispered, not looking up from the infected bullet hole. "The emergency route?" "Blocked since yesterday. Gestapo found the entrance on Podwale Street." His voice carried the weight of impossible choices. "We're trapped." The wounded German Hans, he'd gasped his name during delirium stirred on the makeshift operating table. His fever-bright eyes focused on Krystyna with desperate clarity. "Listen," he breathed. "Operation Thunderstorm. Your people call it Bursa, yes? The Wehrmacht knows the time, the places. My unit. They have lists." Above them, rifle butts hammered against the church doors. Father Kowalski would hold them as long as possible, but even a man of God had limits when facing SS interrogation techniques. Krystyna made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her shortened life. She opened her poetry notebook and pressed it into Tomek's good hand. "Page 47, she told the wounded fighter. "Memorize it. Every word." Tomek's eyes widened as he read. It wasn't poetry. It was a complete list of Armia Krajowa medical stations, supply caches, and communication routes. Information that could save hundreds of lives or doom them all if it fell into German hands. The basement door exploded inward. "Hände hoch!" SS Sturmführer Krebs descended the stairs like death in a black uniform, his Luger drawn. Behind him, 2 soldiers with Schmeisser submachine guns swept the room. Krystyna slowly raised her bloodied hands, but her eyes never left Hans. The deserter's face had gone ashen, not from his wounds, but from recognition. He knew Krebs, and worse, Krebs knew him. "Hans Müller," the SS officer purred. "Private Hans Müller, who was supposed to report to his unit 12 hours ago. Instead, we find him playing doctor with Polish terrorists." The word terrorists hit like a physical blow. In German propaganda, that's what they called anyone who dared resist the occupation. But in this basement, surrounded by medical supplies and wounded fighters, Krystyna saw only patriots bleeding for their homeland. "He's my patient," she said in careful German, hoping to buy time. "I'm a nurse." Krebs laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Krystyna Krahelska, 23 years old, poetry student before the war, hospital worker by day. His pale eyes glittered. Resistance medic by night. Did you think we didn't know? The world tilted. They knew, had always known. This basement clinic, her double life, the upcoming uprising, it had all been a trap. But then Hans spoke, his voice stronger than it should have been for a man with peritonitis. "She saved my life," he said in German, "when my own unit left me to die." Krebs turned his attention to the deserter, and Krystyna caught Stefan's eye. The literature teacher was positioned near the wall where loose bricks concealed an emergency message tube, a pneumatic system that connected to other resistance cells across the city. "Interesting," Krebs mused. "A German soldier preferring Polish mercy to German discipline." That's when the church bells began to ring. Not just St. Martin's bell, but dozens across Warsaw. Deep bronze voices calling out across the occupied city, their ancient songs carrying a modern message. 5 o'clock had come early. The uprising had begun. Through the basement's single window they heard the impossible sound of Polish voices shouting commands, of boots running toward German positions instead of away from them. Somewhere above, rifle fire crackled like celebration fireworks. Krebs snarled and raised his weapon, but Hans moved faster than any wounded man should. He lunged from the operating table, not at the SS officer, but at the lamp plunging the basement into darkness. In that black moment, Krystyna heard Stefan's hand slap against the brick wall. A message cylinder shot through the pneumatic tube carrying page 47 to other resistance cells. Her poetry notebook became a lifeline thrown across the city. "Move!" Stefan's voice cut through chaos. Gunfire erupted in the basement. Muzzle flashes lit fragments of the scene. Krebs spinning toward the sound, Tomek rolling from his stretcher despite his wounded shoulder, Krystyna diving toward her medical bag. When emergency lighting sputtered back to life 30 seconds later, Hans lay motionless beside the overturned operating table. Krebs clutched a bleeding arm, and Stefan was gone, vanished into the maze of tunnels that honeycombed beneath Warsaw's streets. Outside, the city was transforming. Polish voices sang chłopcy, bagnet broń, the fighting song Krystyna had written in this very basement 3 months ago. Her words, her melody, rising from thousands of throats as Warsaw's sons and daughters took up arms against their oppressors. Krebs looked at her with something approaching respect mixed with hatred. "Your song, I believe." Krystyna straightened. Her nurse's uniform torn and bloodied, her poetry notebook gone, but her spirit unbroken. Through the window, tracer bullets drew bright lines across the August sky. "My song," she confirmed, "but it belongs to Warsaw now." As if summoned by her words, explosions thundered from the direction of German headquarters. The uprising had not only begun, it was succeeding. 2 weeks into the uprising, Warsaw burned with a fever that never broke. Krystyna pressed herself against the shattered window of their new makeshift clinic, a bombed-out pharmacy on Marszałkowska Street, and watched Stukas dive through smoke-darkened skies. The Luftwaffe had turned the city into their personal shooting gallery. Each bombing run shook dust from the ceiling, coating her remaining medical supplies with a fine gray powder that tasted of pulverized churches and demolished dreams. 14 days since the bells rang out across Warsaw. 14 days since they'd believed freedom was 17 hours away. "Krystyna." "Dr. Shatian." Kowalczyk limped toward her, his left leg stiff from shrapnel. The elderly physician had joined their underground clinic after his hospital took a direct hit. "We have a problem." She turned from the window, noting how the doctor's eyes avoided meeting hers. In 2 weeks of desperate surgery and impossible choices, she'd learned to read the faces of men who delivered bad news. "The morphine? Gone. Last ampule went to young Zbigniew this morning." His voice carried the weight of 30 years treating Warsaw's wounded. "But that's not the problem." Krystyna felt ice form in her stomach despite the August heat. "Tell me." Stefan sent word through the courier network. "There's a supply drop tonight. British parachutes, medical supplies, ammunition." "But..." Dr. Kowalczyk paused. "It's landing in Mokotów district, German-held territory." Through the broken pharmacy window, Krystyna could see smoke rising from a dozen fires across the city. The uprising had succeeded in capturing most of Warsaw's center, but the Germans still controlled the airport, the bridges, and key residential districts. Mokotów was a death trap surrounded by SS positions. "Who's going?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Stefan requested you specifically." The drop includes a medical kit marked for the poet. British intelligence knows your work. Dr. Kowalczyk's weathered hands shook slightly. "But Krystyna, it's suicide. Half the courier routes to Mokotów have been cut. The Germans are executing civilians on sight." She walked to her medical bag, the same leather case she'd carried from the basement of St. Martin's Church. Inside, wrapped in sterile gauze, lay her new poetry notebook. Since losing the original to Stefan's message tube, she'd started fresh. These pages contain something different. Not just her verses, but the final letters of dying fighters. Last words to mothers, wives, children they'd never see again. How many wounded do we have upstairs? 37. Most won't last the week without proper medication. 37 Polish fighters, bleeding for their city's freedom. Against that arithmetic, one poet's life seemed a small wager. I'll need a guide who knows the sewer routes. Dr. Kowalczyk's relief was visible. Stefan suggested Marta. She's been running supplies through the storm drains for 6 months. Krystyna had heard of Marta, 17 years old. Barely 5 feet tall, with an uncanny ability to navigate Warsaw's underground labyrinth. The kind of person who might survive what was coming. That evening, as darkness settled over the burning city, Krystyna descended into the sewers beneath Marszałkowska Street. The tunnels stank of human waste and cordite, but they were the arteries keeping resistance-held Warsaw alive. Messages, ammunition, wounded fighters, everything that mattered flowed through these fetid passages. Marta waited at the junction of 3 tunnels, her slight figure barely visible in the dim light of a shielded lantern. She wore a man's coat several sizes too large and carried a modified Sten gun that looked bigger than she was. "You're the poet," Marta said. It wasn't a question. "I'm a nurse who writes verses." Same thing in Warsaw. The girl's eyes held the premature wisdom of someone who'd seen too much. Ready? They moved through the tunnels like ghosts, Marta's sure feet finding paths Krystyna couldn't even see. Above them, the city continued its nightly symphony. Rifle fire, artillery explosions, the distant drone of German bombers. Sometimes they passed other figures in the darkness, couriers carrying messages, fighters moving to new positions, civilians fleeing areas about to be retaken by Wehrmacht forces. 2 hours into their journey, Marta held up a hand for silence. Through a drainage grate above, they could hear German voices, an SS patrol, probably hunting for sewer entrances. "They've been systematic lately," Marta whispered. "Sealing tunnels, flooding others. Someone's giving them information about our routes." The word hung between them like an accusation. Informant, collaborator. The poison that had infected every resistance movement across occupied Europe. They waited in absolute silence for 20 minutes before the German voices faded. When they resumed their underground march, Krystyna found herself thinking about Hans, the deserter who died in St. Martin's basement. Had he really been seeking sanctuary? Or was his intelligence about the uprising part of an even deeper German game? The supply drop zone was a bombed-out school in Mokotów, its playground now a crater-scarred field. British intelligence had chosen well. The ruins provided cover while the open space allowed parachutes to land safely. But as they approached through the final stretch of tunnel, Marta grabbed Krystyna's arm. Something's wrong. Above them, the night was too quiet. No insect sounds, no distant gunfire. Even the ever-present smoke seemed to have stilled. Krystyna checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. The drop was scheduled for midnight. "We go back," Marta decided. "This feels like a trap." But as they turned to retreat, flashlight beams cut through the tunnel behind them. German voices echoed off the concrete walls, growing closer. They were surrounded. Through the drainage grate above, Krystyna could see the silhouettes of SS soldiers positioned around the school playground, waiting in perfect ambush formation. Someone had betrayed not just them, but the entire supply operation. The flashlight beams closed in from both directions, turning the tunnel into a concrete tomb. Marta's hand found Krystyna's in the darkness. 17-year-old fingers intertwining with 23-year-old ones, both sets trembling despite their owner's courage. "There," Marta whispered, pointing to a maintenance shaft barely visible in the tunnel wall. "It leads to the old, pneumatic message system. Too narrow for grown men." Above them, SS Sturmführer Krebs's voice cut through the darkness with surgical precision. Krystyna Krahelska, we know you're down there. The British supply drop was quite generous with information about their favorite Polish poet. The betrayal hit like ice water. Not just their mission, the entire British intelligence network had been compromised. Every supply drop, every coded message, every carefully planned operation feeding directly into German hands. How many have to die for your verses? Krebs continued, his voice echoing off tunnel walls. Come up now, and the girl lives. Krystyna felt Marta's grip tighten, not with fear, but with fury. This child had spent 6 months crawling through Warsaw's bowels, carrying hope between dying resistance cells. And now, she was being used as leverage. Go, Krystyna whispered, pushing Marta toward the maintenance shaft. Someone needs to warn the others. Not without you. That's an order from your poet. Marta's eyes flashed. Then write me something to remember you by. Krystyna pulled out her notebook, the one containing final letters from dying fighters. She tore out a blank page and scribbled quickly in the dim light. Hej, chłopcy! Bagnet na broń. Za wolność walczy się. A jeśli krew przelać przyjdzie nam, to nie żal młodości. The opening, verses of her song The Anthem that had become Warsaw's battle cry. But she added something new. Written in the margin, the song belongs to Warsaw. The singer belongs to history. Keep them both alive. K. She pressed the paper into Marta's hands just as German boots splashed into the tunnel from both directions. The girl squeezed through the maintenance shaft like smoke, vanishing into Warsaw's circulatory system with Krystyna's final poem clutched against her chest. When Krystyna climbed out of the sewer grate into the school playground, she found herself surrounded by a perfect circle of Wehrmacht soldiers. Above, British parachutes drifted down through searchlight beams, the supply drop proceeding exactly as planned, directly into German hands. Krebs stood among the ruins of the school's main building, his SS uniform immaculate, despite 2 weeks of urban warfare. Behind him, a radio operator transcribed coded messages in real time, every British transmission being intercepted and decoded. Impressive, Krystyna said, noting the sophisticated equipment. How long have you been reading their mail? Since before your little uprising began? Krebs smiled with genuine satisfaction. Operation Tempest was quite useful. Your people fought so bravely, died so beautifully, all while we mapped every resistance cell in Warsaw. The playground filled with German soldiers opening British supply containers, medical supplies, ammunition, communication equipment, everything Warsaw's fighters needed, now lost. But Krystyna found herself thinking about Marta, already miles away through the tunnel system, carrying word to Dr. Kowalczyk and the 37 wounded fighters in the bombed pharmacy. Your song is quite popular, Krebs continued. Our radio intercepts pick it up from every district. Hej, chłopcy, bagnet na broń. Very stirring, very foolish. Music survives longer than men with guns. Perhaps, but poets are more fragile than their verses. As September's first light touched the ruins of Warsaw, Krystyna thought about the notebook pages scattered across the city. Her poems copied by hand, passed between fighters, sung in basement clinics and rooftop sniper nests. The words had taken on life beyond their creator, becoming part of Warsaw's bloodstream. 3 days later, when the Luftwaffe resumed its systematic bombing of resistance-held districts, Krystyna Krahelska died in the rubble of a makeshift hospital on Długa Street. She was tending to wounded civilians when the ceiling collapsed. Her final patient, an 8-year-old boy whose mother had been killed by shrapnel. But her song lived. It echoed through the sewers where Marta continued running supplies to isolated resistance cells. It rose from the throats of fighters making their last stand in the old town. It was hummed by Warsaw's women as they searched for food and bombed out shops, and whistled by children too young to understand why their city was burning. When the uprising finally ended on October 2nd, after 63 days of impossible courage, the surviving resistance fighters were marched into German captivity. As they walked through Warsaw's destroyed streets, their voices joined together in one final act of defiance. Hej, chłopcy! Bagnet na broń! Za wolność walczy się. The song that had begun in a basement clinic, written by a poet nurse who believed words could heal wounds and music could stop bullets, became Warsaw's immortal heartbeat. It survived the uprising's failure, survived the city's systematic destruction, survived the long winter of occupation that followed. In basements across Poland, in prisoner of war camps across Germany, in the hearts of Warsaw's scattered children, Krystyna Krahelska's song continued beating. The poet had paid the price of witness, but her testimony lived on, not in the pages of history books, but in the voices of people who refuse to forget. Because sometimes, when everything else burns, the song remains. The end. Historical note, Krystyna Krahelska, 1914 to 1944, was a real Polish poet, actress, and resistance member who wrote Hej, chłopcy, bagnet na broń during the Warsaw Uprising. She died on August 2nd, 1944, just one day after the uprising began, but her song became one of the most recognized anthems of Polish resistance.